Before we get into today's Thinking Thursday, I just want to say ignore the little plaster across my nose. I had a work accident. It's all fine. I was taken to the hospital. It's healing pretty well. I think it should be closed, like healed closed by next week. So it's okay. We'll just ignore it. Today's Thinking Thursday is going to be about Ona Judge. And she was a slave woman who freed herself from the household of George Washington. Yes, that George Washington, the first president of the United States. Now, she was born on George Washington's property, which was the Mount Vernon plantation in Virginia, but she was from a slave who had been part of Martha Washington's previous household. So Martha Washington was previously married to Daniel Parke Custis, and he had possession of these slaves, and Betty, who was Ona's mother, was part of that household's possession of human beings, which is horrendous to say as a statement. But then when Custis died and Martha remarried George Washington, she arrived at Mount Vernon with about 80 to 85 enslaved people, and Betty was one of them, and Betty fell pregnant with her fourth child at Mount Vernon, who was Ona. And we don't actually know how many children Betty had in total, but we do know that Ona's father was an indentured person called Andrew Judge. So he was a white man who had offered a 4-year term of indenturement, which is basically 4 years of enslavement, for $30. Now, at the time, these are Spanish dollars, because in the American colonies, Spain had a lot of power, so the Spanish dollar was actually kind of used more. So these are 30 Spanish dollars. So please excuse me for not being able to translate that into modern money. But to give context, the average price for an indenturement for lifetime, so a lifetime of enslavement, was 180 Spanish dollars. And this guy, Andrew Judge, was a tailor. Like, he had some skills. We're not really sure why he indentured himself for 4 years. Maybe there was some police troubles that he was trying to escape. But he was definitely in poverty, and George Washington bought his 4-year term of indenturement for $30. And Andrew Judge served his 4-year term and then moved 11 miles down the road and never spoke to Betty again. And it's really important to share some quite uncomfortable facts about what it meant for an enslaved woman to have children, and why the masters of the household might have done absolutely nothing about non-consensual interactions between members of that property. So during that era of time, so this is in the 1770s, Ona was born in 1773, when a woman was enslaved, her children would automatically be enslaved if they were born whilst she was in slavery. And sometimes even if they were born before the woman was taken into slavery, if they had traveled with her. But this is why it actually, profit-wise, was in the interests of masters to sort of breed new slaves, because it was free labor for them. So having a white 4-year term of indenturement meant that Andrew Judge might have actually been encouraged by George Washington or someone in the house to impregnate Betty, so that there would be more slaves to do housework and work on the property. And especially because Betty was mixed race, she had one white parent and one BIPOC parent, and then Andrew was just white. So Ona had 3 white grandparents. She was 3/4 white. I mean, it just feels ridiculous to be talking in these terms. She was a human, and she had different traits, and we shouldn't really be thinking of humans like that. But from the George Washington term, people in the household, so servants, that's what they called them, servants, in all of their references to the people that they owned, they always call them servants. They refuse to use the word slave. The people that they had working in the household were all mixed race. So the paler the person was, there was a correlation between how pale their skin was and how closely they got to work with the masters and mistress of the house, or the lady of the house. And we see this in Ona's case. So she had 3 white grandparents. Later on, there is actually a description of what she looked like. And so she had pale, freckled skin, but she had very dark eyes and very dark hair. But she initially, as a child, when she's about 10 years old, she starts working as a playmate for Nellie Custis, who is Martha Washington's niece or grandchild. I've forgotten whether it's niece or grandchild, but she starts working with the family. And then when she gets older, she becomes like the lady's maid. I think she's just called like the personal attendant. I think the lady's maid is a bit more of an Englishy way of calling it, but I think in America it was like personal attendant to Martha. So to Martha Washington. And she kind of over the years becomes a seamstress, like she picks up the skills of working as a seamstress. So one of the perks of that job is that she actually gets more clothes than anyone else in the household, because she kind of gets like not only the discarded clothes that Martha doesn't want anymore or feels that have gone out of fashion, but she also gets the offcuts because she was having to do a lot of adaptations of Martha's clothes to keep up with the fashions. So she had access to very, very nice materials. So it is also mentioned, and we'll come to that later, that she had a significantly larger wardrobe than a lot of the other people of her class, we might say. But yeah, still would have preferred freedom, and that comes up later too. So we have Bessie, who has Ona and 3 other children, also by potentially indentured people. She had 2 kids who were Betty Davis and Tom Davis, by some other indentured servant called Davis, who was also white. But at no point does it seem like Betty ever gets freedom. She seems tied to the estate. And Ona's had a half sister who did manage to get free, but then died. And so there is a notion to Ona that it is possible to get freedom, but it's not something that is easily acquired, and it does mean escaping. She was considered a dower slave, and her mother was a dower slave, which meant that she was not actually Martha's possession. So Martha couldn't sell her or like inherit her off to someone. But she was attached to the Custis household. So when Martha died, she would either be freed or handed over to whoever inherited the Custis property. Kind of like, a house. It either gets turned over to the state or handed to whoever the inheriting person is. So she didn't actually belong to Martha. She would be freed from use, from Martha's use, once Martha passed away, but she would then be kind of inherited by Custis's grandchildren. And she at the time witnessed some of the other servants, slaves of the household, make an escape. So there was kind of this kerfuffle that was happening along the port, and a load of the indentured servants and slaves managed to get on a boat and escape the Washington household. 7 of them were brought back, and they were heavily punished. But some of the enslaved people seemingly did get away. We don't actually know what happened to any of them except one, and she managed to make it all the way to Sierra Leone, which is amazing. And so Ona would have taken this story on and go, wow, okay, people can actually get away. There is an opportunity for freedom. And so this story kind of must have brewed within her, because she fought for her freedom for a long time. So she served for a long time, but she also fought for her freedom for a long time. And she did eventually manage to get freedom, although she never managed to get legal freedom. So she technically remained property of the Custis estate for the rest of her life, but she did manage to escape. However, the dynamics of the household flipped quite radically while she was still serving the Washington family, because in 1789, while she was still serving Martha Washington, George Washington became the first president. So they had to move from Virginia to New York. At the time, Washington, as we know it now, was being built. So for 10 years, they had to be elsewhere, but they moved to the coast. So they were first living in New York, and Ona was seeing populations of black people. So at the time, 10% of the New York population was black, and 7.5%, so 2/3 of that population, was black slaves. But then there was a little tiny population of 2.5% of the population who were free black people. And so she was seeing these people, and she was realizing there is possibility for you to have freedom and have autonomy. On the corner of the street where they were living, there was actually black women who were selling stew, and they could keep the money that they were making, and they were making a little livelihood for herself. So this definitely percolated ideas. At the time, Ona was working with the children and grandchildren of the family, as well as serving Martha as a lady's maid or as a personal assistant. But she was having to live like in the household next to she kind of had an offshoot room. I don't think I would have wanted to have to go through my employer's room to, get to another part of the house. Like if I need to, I don't know, get up in the middle of the night and get a glass of water or something, or, like I would feel really weird about literally being in like a cupboard room attached to my employer's bedroom. But that's how she was living in New York. And then she was having to run errands, and she was seeing this 2.5% of the population exercise their freedom and their independence. And she really wanted a taste of it. And then they moved to Pennsylvania onto 6th and Market Street. And this is where things start to get interesting legally. So Pennsylvania actually had a gradual abolition act, which meant that all enslaved people had to be registered. No new slaves could be bought in Pennsylvania, and no new slaves could be brought in. And all children who were born to enslaved women would be automatically freed on their 28th birthday if they asked for their freedom. And that enslaved people could not be kept in an enslaved status if they were there long term. And long term meant more than 6 months. So basically, if you had a slave in Pennsylvania, after 6 months of long-term stay, they would be freed if they asked for their freedom. And so the Washingtons did not tell their enslaved property, the people of their servitude, that this was the case. And George Washington actually said himself that he didn't believe that his servants were bright enough to work this out or well connected enough to hear about it. And so they just started shipping off their servants, the 6 servants that they brought with them. So originally they'd had hundreds, as in like 300 servant people, who were kind of scattered across different estates. And then when they moved to New York City and then to Pennsylvania, they'd only brought 6 with them. But they believed that the 6 that they brought with them, even though they were kind of like their best servants, they believed that they weren't smart enough or well connected enough to hear about the Gradual Abolition Act. And so they just started making up reasons to send these 6 people out of state at different times. So for example, Austin, who was actually, I think, either Ona's cousin or half brother, Austin was one of the 6 slaves they brought with them. He was sent back to Mount Vernon in Virginia to supposedly see his wife Charlotte. He'd been married in Virginia, and so Martha had said, "Oh, I'm sending you back to honor a promise that I would send you back to your wife," because like they literally had like got married, and then Austen had just been removed. Like the Washingtons did not give a crap about that relationship. So the concept that Martha was like honoring a promise that she'd made to Charlotte is absolute bullsnot. And it's also documented that she absolutely hated Charlotte. She did not like Austen's wife at all. So it's clearly just hogwash that she's saying like, oh yeah, well, you know, you were like freshly married when we took you from your new marital situation, Austen, so I'm gonna like send you back and you can go and spend some time with your wife in Mount Vernon, and then, you know, come back after that. Like, I'm being really nice. No, it was because if the Washingtons sent their slaves out of state, it would restart the 6-month period when they re-entered into Pennsylvania. So it was a way of keeping them in enslavement without informing them about the circumstances. Austen was giving some money and sent by himself back to Mount Vernon. And you might be thinking, well, surely he would make a break for it. But at the time, there was also a law that if you helped an enslaved person escape, you could be fined $500, which is a crazy amount of money at the time. You could be jailed, and then you could also be sued by the slave owner. So it really, really was unlikely that someone was going to help Austen to escape. So he did go back to Mount Vernon and then return to Pennsylvania. He didn't make a break for it. And this was happening with all of the other 5 who were being sent off in different directions in order for that clock to be restarted so that they wouldn't automatically get their freedom after 6 months. The Washingtons kept this up for years. So originally, Washington, the place, Washington, D.C., was just like marshland. And it took a hell of a lot of work to turn that into the presidential house that it is now. It took 10 years. And within this time, so George Washington is elected in 1789. In 1796, Ona's had enough. She's going to make a break for it. When she learns that Martha wants to give her away to her granddaughter Elizabeth as a wedding gift. Now, Elizabeth was known for having a shockingly crap temper and for being just an all-around cow. She was like a horrendous person. She was Elizabeth Parke Custis Law, and Martha wanted to give away Ona as a wedding gift. And when Ona found this out, she was like, no, I have heard how much of a bitch Elizabeth is. I'm not doing that. Yeah, this is like the final straw. But at the time, the chimney sweep of the Washington household was called Richard Allen, and he was actually a leader of the free black community, and he was creating an underground railroad with his wife to help free indentured and enslaved people. The Washingtons didn't know this, but that chimney sweep, Richard Allen, and Ona Judge were getting a lot of communication, and they were starting to plan an escape. Because Ona was like, I'm having none of this. It's bad enough working for the Washingtons that I'm not going to go and work for an absolute all-out cow. Richard Allen made arrangements for Ona to have a place on a ship that was headed to New Hampshire. But there was a few days between when Ona made her escape on the 21st of May, 1796, and when we have posters for the ship actually leaving, like the captain had put up posters saying, this is when I'm leaving, like if you want to ship something and pay me some money for, you know, shipping it for you, like this is when I'll be going, so give me the money before then, or like if you're trying to free yourself, this is when the ship is leaving. He put up posters that said the 25th of May, 1796. So there was the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th when they leave. And so it's probably likely that Richard had also made arrangements for her to be housed somewhere and hidden and protected after she'd made her escape. And she made her escape very strategically. So she made her escape in the evening during dinner service because she was not needed. The Washingtons only were served by male servants during dinner. So there was this like couple of hours where no one would have noticed if she disappeared. And that's when she escaped. In the Washington household, Ona was referred to as Oni, and it's a diminutizing of her name. It might be because she worked with the children and that's what they called her. I don't know. But when the Washingtons hired Frederick Pitt to write up posters and put posters everywhere saying that a woman had absconded from the household of the president, he refers to her as Ona Judge rather than Ona. And so Frederick Pitt wrote, absconded from the household of the President of the United States on Saturday afternoon, Ona Judge, a mulatto girl, much freckled with very black eyes and bushy black hair. She is of middle stature, but slender and delicate make. She is about 20 years of age and has many changes of very good clothes of all sorts, but they are not sufficiently recollected to describe. As there was no suspicion of her going off, nor no provocation to do so, it is not easy to conjecture whither she has gone or fully what her design is. But as she may attempt to escape by water, all masters of vessels are cautioned against admitting her into them, although it is probable she will attempt to pass for a free woman and has, it is said, wherewithal to pay her passage. Now, let's just take a point out of that. They are saying there is no provocation for her to try and make an escape. I don't know, enslavement? That would provoke me. I'd be really damn provoked. But then also the fact that she was going to be just gifted off to the cow that is the granddaughter of Martha Washington. Also, provocation. I would be pretty provoked out that door. But then there was a $10 reward if she was brought back. All of this is so sad. But what isn't sad is that she actually made it to the vessel. So on the 25th of May, she escaped. And the instructions she had been given by Richard Allen was wear a plain dress, go straight down to the docks. They are 5 blocks away. Do not run. Walk like a free woman. Look for a one-masted ship carrying saddles and potatoes. The captain's name is John Bulls, but never say his name. He is a white man, and this is very dangerous for him. He will suffer great punishment for helping you. So she's managed to make it to this ship. You know, she's like, nope, never saying the captain's name, but like, thank you so much, Captain Bulls. And she manages to flee to her new life on Captain Bulls' ship, which is called Nancy. Remember that name, it comes up later. So she's managed to abscond to New Hampshire, not without her being chased down by the Washingtons. So George Washington flips out about this. Now, it's probably Martha being like, where is my personal servant? But George was not happy about this situation. So George Washington contacted Oliver Wolcott Jr., who was the Secretary of the Treasury, and was like, yo, I need my possessions back. You are the Secretary of the Treasury. Give me back my treasure. Go find it. And then Wolcott Jr. gets Joseph Whipple on the case, who was the customs collector of Portsmouth in New Hampshire. And so this customs collector is sent out to go and find Oni or Ona Judge. And he's not really happy about this. The Whipples actually released all of their enslaved people, and he did not support the notion of Ona being brought back into enslavement. However, he was kind of had his hands tied because it's the president of the United States who's pushing for this. So he makes this poster saying that him and his wife are looking for a house servant for a very, very well-paid job. And so Ona Judge sees this and she shows up for what she thinks is a job interview. Now, Joseph Whipple has actually had a bit of clapback to the president saying you need an affidavit to prove that you own Ona if you want her to come back. There has to be due process on this thing. And basically George Washington said to him, you will be paid off in money and my good feelings for doing this. And so George Washington is literally saying, ignore the law, I'm the president. And there isn't any evidence that, the president would have been excused from this law. I mean, they hadn't had a president previously, so they weren't on that of what happens when the president has an issue in this case. But he should have been not allowed to just get Ona back without giving an affidavit proving that she was under his possession and there being some kind of legal process of things going through a court. But George Washington was like, no, I'll pay you. You can have my good favors. Joseph Whipple, just go and do what I say. So again, already at the beginning of the United States, the president thinks he's above the law. Great. All that freedom that we talk about. Apparently, it's extra freedom if you're the president. So Joseph Whipple is not really happy about this when Ona shows up for this supposed job interview, and he immediately drops the charade. He's like, look, George Washington knows where you are. He's looking for you and he wants you back. And George Washington, the Washingtons actually believed that Ona wouldn't have left of her own free will. They thought she'd been like coerced by a Frenchman to go to New Hampshire. And they just couldn't believe that she would willingly escape to freedom because, you know, they were the presidential family. So they did have massive estates and like very comfortable houses to live in. And she was kind of the top servant in their little community. She was kind of considered like having all of the best features of her enslavement. She had like the most perks. So they just couldn't believe that she would leave of her own accord. And that's the message that they kind of passed on to Joseph Whipple. I think that's the only reason he was willing to partake in this, is that he actually believed that she might have been coerced and like, or taken against her will. But he then wrote to George Washington afterwards saying that she was absconding purely for the sake of her thirst for complete freedom. So he is actually telling George Washington, she just wants to be free. Leave her the fuck alone. The agreement George Washington had made was that if Ona returns, she wouldn't be punished. How believable is that? Don't know. But basically Ona had said like, yeah, okay, household's real nice. I'll go back. I'll do it. Okay, fine. And so Joseph Whipple arranges for a boat to take her, but when the boat is ready to go, no sign of Ona. So Ona's escaped. She actually starts a new life. She gets married to Jack Staines. The original place that she tried to get married was actually like blocked from marrying her because Joseph Whipple had like put out this notice saying like she's an enslaved person. She can't get married without her owner's permission. But the second place that they went to was like, yeah, you can get married. So she gets married to Jack Staines. They have a daughter called Eliza Staines. And then the George Washington household just can't leave it alone. So she's like set up, she ends up having 3 kids in total. But she's like in her new house in New Hampshire, and Burwell Bassett Jr., who is George Washington's nephew, is sent to New Hampshire to basically go and take Ona back. And Ona meets with him and is like, no way, brah, I'm not going back. And Burwell Bassett has a little like freak out about this. He's like, what do you mean you're not coming back with me? Like, we have the best household to be part of. But that evening, Burwell Bassett is the guest of Governor John Langdon. And over dinner, he like basically tells Langdon his plan to kidnap Ona Judge and take her back. And Langdon informs Ona and tells her to escape. She escapes to the household of the Jacks. So Phyllis and John Jack take her and her baby in. So at this time, it's just Eliza Staines and Ona Judge Staines who escape to the Jacks household. But they end up actually looking after her and her family for the rest of her life. First is Eliza Staines, who was born in 1798, so 2 years after Ona's Great Escape. And she was born in New Hampshire. And then there was Will Staines, who was born in 1801. And then there was Nancy Staines, who was born the year after in 1802. Okay, so she named one of her children after the vessel that had brought her to freedom. But the Jacks family actually ended up looking after Ona for the rest of her life. Sadly, Jack Staines passed away when Ona was only 30. They only had 7 years together as a happy couple. He was a sailor, and I'm not really sure whether he like disappeared at sea, but he passed away when she was 30. And then their son Will Staines also became a sailor, but he disappeared at sea. And then Ona actually outlived both of her daughters by like over a decade. So Eliza Staines died in 1832 and Nancy Staines died in 1833, both in New Hampshire. And unfortunately, Ona couldn't really pay her way, but the Jacks family continued to look after her. So John Jack Jr. looks after her, and Eliza and Nancy had been wards of the town, and Will had been apprenticed off as a sailor. But then at the end of her life, the Rockingham County actually donated firewood and some food and supplies to keep Ona going after her children had passed away. And then she passed away on February 25th in 1848 at the age of 73. But I think a question comes up about the nature of humanity, in that we desire freedom at all costs. And Ona was willing to move to a life of impoverishment as long as it was a life of free impoverishment, as long as there was some hope that she could have possessions of something and make something for herself. She was willing to take that risk. And I do think that in the circumstances that enslaved people were in, it's very difficult to know, but they were given a crazy difficult situation even when they were freed. So even when they got their freedom, the best that they were given was a bit of land and a couple of animals to tend to that land. It's so difficult to start from scratch that that's almost like an enslavement too. You're denied the right of shelter. You aren't given anything. We overlook how incredible it is that people managed to make something of themselves even when they gained freedom. If you were just given land and a couple of animals to tend to it, which was the best they were given in most circumstances. Most of them had nothing. They just escaped with nothing but, that which they were wearing. At the best opportunity, it's like, okay, well, here's a field and a couple of animals. You're free now. Like, that is a terrifying prospect. So it takes so much bravery to actually have turned that into a life. And it's really important to see how powerful these people were in their self-empowerment. It is an opportunity, but it is an opportunity that is so unfair. You are not starting from the same starting place as someone who had the right to possession all of the rest of the years of their life. You are starting from nothing. So yes, they were given freedom, but they built their lives from scratch. And Ona Judge built her life, her long life, and her children's life out of nothing. Yes, she might have been impoverished at the end of her life, but her life was hers, and she took full possession of it. And that's so powerful.